Hello and welcome to this repair tutorial, and today we're going to look at a Marantz PM44SE series amplifier. Now this is quite a popular amplifier that comes into the workshop. Be reassured there will be many more. So in terms of general specifications, power output for this amplifier is at 54 watts into 8 ohms, but that will actually increase to 80 watts per channel into 4 ohms or 100 watts per channel then into 2 ohms. Now when you look from the back of the amplifier, and this isn't relating to the front, so there's nothing which is switchable, you have two sets of speaker terminals, and you can see also as well, you'll see the word by wiring. So this amplifier, like many of the amplifiers of this sort of age, also supports by wiring, so you can by wire effectively 4 speakers to the amplifier, which is an interesting feature and still highly sought after nowadays. And then for frequency response, so this is standard, so it's 20 Hz to 20 kilohertz. And then total harmonic distortion, you're looking at 0.15%. And input sensitivity for the line inputs, which is your video tuner, tape, aux and DDC, is 150 millivolts. And then it has the ability to connect directly a turntable, so you can connect a moving magnet type cartridge to the amplifier, and that's standard again at 2.5 millivolts. And then dimension wise, you're looking at a height of 420 millimeters by 118 and a depth overall of 280, and you have a weight of 10 kilograms. Now on this series of amplifier, even sort of this time period, you could find amplifiers which had a remote control function, maybe to place the amplifier into mute mode or operate the volume control, but not for this one. And then in terms of physical controls, you don't have, for example, bass and treble controls. For your tone circuit, you can have a balance, but that's pretty much it. You don't have anything else. And then your input selection is mechanical, so it's not electronic switching or via input selection relays. And you have, of course, the ability to do like a tape monitor mode as well, if you so wish. So what was the issue when this amplifier came into the workshop? Well, the description said that it didn't power up, and that's very true. So once the top cover was removed, the first place you're going to go look is the power protection fuse, which I'm showing here, and the value of this fuse is T for a time delay fuse of 1.6 amps. And what you can see that it's just slightly vaporized. It hasn't sort of been catastrophic, but you can see that it has failed. Now on previous repair descriptions for this series of amplifier, one of the most common issues is that you develop dry joints, and we'll sort of get to that in a little while. But for this amplifier there was a failure of one of the output transistors on the main board. But before we sort of get into that, we just want to sort of talk about some of the other work which you would normally carry out on this amplifier. So once the top cover's off, and then next what I'm showing then is the rear of the amplifier, and you have really two options. Okay, so when you look at the rear of the amplifier and you remove the different fixing screws, what I'm highlighting here is the speaker terminals, and I've mentioned this repair video sort of on other repair video blocks. What you can see is that the metal is exposed, so there's no paint, and that's critically important. The reason for that is that when the screws are tightened up, it connects to a common ground point on the back of the speaker terminals, and in turn, because they're soldered into the circuit board for the main amplifier board, you'll also find that there are fixing screws, 4 of them, that hold the board in position and lock it to the chassis. This is a common ground or a common circuit connection, and you must ensure that that is in place if you do any kind of repair work and then you power it up. If you power it up with the back panel removed and you don't have the grounding screws on the speaker terminals, it will fail catastrophically, and you'll probably take out all of the output transistors and maybe some associated components as well then. So that's why I'm showing you this. Now if you're in a test mode, don't be too concerned. So you don't have to fit all the screws, fit maybe 1 or 2 to the back panel and then the 4 fixing screws for the speaker terminals, and that should be fine. At least then you have the ground connection showing you the 4 screws around the main amp board. And then in terms of what work do you need to carry out, again, I've used this term before, I just use a systematic approach. So the next thing that I want to look at are the input boards, and the input boards are for the line input, where you would, for example, have the DDC connection and tape connection, and then also you have the dedicated phono board. Again, that's what I'm showing here in the video. Now what you will find is that dry joints will form around the solder connections for the sockets, so you need to reflow all of those. And then what I would also say to you as well, just check the interconnecting cables between the boards and then the board cables as they go off to the tone board. You need to verify, because you can find that some of these connections just become dry jointed, so reflow if you need to then. And then once that is all done, I'm drawing your attention now to the input selection switch. And again, you must carry out this work. You might think, well, okay, I can spray some switch cleaner in there, maybe De-Oxit, a high quality switch cleaner, and maybe you get, a temporary improvement. But if you look here, what you can see is that the slide contact, and this is the contact between your phono, aux, tuner, etc., is oxidized. So the contact that's being made will be intermittent, and this is when you get the symptom where you try and select between channels and you get intermittent loss of audio on one or on both channels, and then you move the selection switch just slightly and then it then comes back. So what I demonstrate here is both the before and then the after. And the way in which you would do this is you just unclip, and it's like a carriage mechanism just on the top, dead easy to do, like an actuator, and then just desolder the switch from the board. And then what I use is, rather than use some pliers, I just use some old small component lead clippers, and then I can just bend the tabs out of the way, not all the way across, because you don't want to snap them off. And then what I do is I just extract, as you can see here, and then I can then disassemble the switch. What I would always say is, if this is the first time that you're doing this, just make sure you take a photograph so you know the orientation and how you need to put it back together. And then I use a fiberglass pencil just to finely clean the connections, glistening back, all good. And then I'll then just put a slip grease onto there, high quality, which again is from De-Oxit, excuse me. And then in terms of testing, don't reassemble the switch completely, so you don't have to bend back the tabs. Reassemble the switch and then connect it back onto the actuator, and then just operate it from the front. And then you can verify that you've got the actuator in the right slot in the plastic mechanism or carriage on the top, and verify that it travels backwards and forwards correctly. If you go and bend all the tabs down and it's not aligned correctly, then if you take it out and then you bend the tabs again, there's a fair chance they could snap off, so you don't want to do that. And then what I'll do also is just get a multimeter, and then I can then check continuity as it selects on both the left and right channel. And for this amplifier, all was good. So once that was verified, I could bend the tabs back and then resolder it back into the board then. And as I mentioned earlier, and again I'm going to show this now, you can see this dedicated phono board for the moving magnet type input. And in all of the many years that I've seen these amplifiers come through the workshop, I've never had a failure in this area. No sort of failure of the operational amplifier in the phono section, and it does produce a good quality sound. And then the next thing that I'm showing here is the power input board, and the power input board does from time to time have dry solder connections on there. So it's just two screws just on the right hand side when you look from the rear, and then you have like a terminal lead. It's almost like a circlip, so you just unclip that, and then you can then just release one plastic spacer or pillar, and then you can lift the board up. Just remember, before you do that, if you take a flat blade screwdriver, wide bladed, just open up the slide plunger which connects there for the on-off operation, and then you can then resolder that board. And in this case, I wouldn't say they were dry jointed, the connections to the power switch, but they could have been better then. And then once that's done, I then pay attention now to where the fault is. So to get access or to lift up the main amp board, I mentioned it a while ago, you have 4 fixing screws. Remove those, and then when you look towards the front of the board from the rear, you can see there's 2 metal tabs. Just bend them slightly out of the way, and then you can then lift it up, release the terminal pillars, and then lift that board all the way up. and then what I'm then focusing on is what the issue is, and I'll show you here. So the number one issue that you have, and the reason for the failure of the fuse more often than not, are these dry solder joints, and these are on the voltage driver transistors which are mounted on the heatsink. So you have to reflow them, but don't just flow those transistors, also flow all of the other dry joints as well. And what I also do is I replace the speaker protection relay, purely because of the age of the amplifier, and if you do that, then you have some longevity back on the repair then. Now, while I've completed the work on the dry solder joints, it's very easy then to make the next test, and you have to do this, all right? Don't just rely on, say, okay, well, I found some dry joints, I'm going to reassemble it and power it up. Remember that it can be the case that the output transistors also fail on one of the channels, and sadly that was the case for this amplifier here. So the failure related to the right channel, and the transistors of interest are Q762, which is a 2SC3182, and its equivalent then, which is a 2SA164. Now, these transistors are original Toshiba devices, and the market is flooded with counterfeit. All right, so if you're looking to get a replacement transistor, what you will find is that these counterfeit transistors are out there then. I just need to make a correction there, because I actually said that so that's the wrong way around. So just to recap, just to make the correction there. So right channel, and then what you have is Q764, and then that transistor there is a 2SA1265N, and then its equivalent then on the other side is Q762, and it's a 2SC3182, and that's the complementary pair. So what I was doing, it was just verifying, you know, is the transistors good or bad. I checked the left channel first and no failure, but when I checked the transistor shown, it was short circuit collector to emitter, which was a bit of a shame. So you have to fit genuine originals, as I said, and you can still source them, but you've got to sort of get them from reputable suppliers, and in all cases, because they're obsolete, because they're Toshiba ones, it will be new old stock. So rather than just replace the one transistor, both had failed, I replaced both of them. And then before I'm doing any form of testing, what I also do is just verify that none of the associated resistors in the circuit or any of the driver transistors or any other component has gone open circuit or short circuit. And there was no other issue there. So I was very confident that that board was good and was ready for test. But what I do is I just reinstall the board onto the chassis, but there's some additional work that I must carry out as part of the repair and service. And what my attention then moves to is the tone control board, and I'm showing that here from the back when looking in. Now, to get this board out and to remove it, it is very easy. So what I would advise you to do is just pull off the knob, which is for the balance control, and then you have a locking nut which is behind there, so you can just extract it. And then what I'll do is, if you go in from the top, you can remove 3 fixing screws, and then there's also 2 fixing screws on the left hand side top and 1 on the right. Once you've done that, there's like spring plastic clips, you just pull them forward and you can slide off the front fascia, which is great. And then you can then get a Phillips screwdriver or positive drive screwdriver, just release the fixing screw which is on the headphone socket far right looking from the rear, and then you have 2 semi-countersunk screws which are towards the push buttons. Once you've done that, you can extract that board and just lift it up, and then what I show you next are the dry joints which always form. You will see dry joints on the headphone socket because of the mechanical stress, and over time those solder connections crack, so reflow them, make sure they're good. And then sometimes you can get this one where you only have sound on one channel and it's got nothing to do with the selection switch or the speaker protection relay. It's due to dry joints then on the balance control. So I just make sure those are reflowed and soldered. And I would say the same thing again, just scour that board, make sure that you don't have any dry joints on the interconnections. And while the board's out, I also spray directly then into the different selection switches, with De-Oxit and just operate them multiple times just to make sure that contact is good and there's no associated noise, and you know, operation is clear. Then the next thing that I'm showing you is the volume control potentiometer. Now, because of the age of the amp, it will get dirt and dusty in there, and you might get crackling when you rotate it. For this amp, I didn't. So once I've removed it, to get access is dead easy. Pull off the front knob for the volume control, and then you'll then have a locking nut and a washer behind there. Just remove it, and then there's just two plastic spring tabs. Just open them up and you can slide that small board out, lift it up, and at the same time of cleaning it with De-Oxit, so spray it in and then just work it backwards and forwards multiple times and then soak up any excess. And then what I'm able to do also is just to check those dry solder joints and that umbilical cable, which is a multi-core that plugs in and then locks into position, to make sure there's no dry joints there or poor connection. So once that's done, I'm then confident then that I can then assemble the amplifier. So I'll fit the boards back and then put in the tone control board and also mount the back panel as well. Now, the next thing that I'm showing you just before we sort of talk about the adjustment on this amplifier, and you may find this if you're doing the repairs, sometimes when you pull the input selection knob or you pull the volume control knob, what will happen is the metal of the knob just pulls away, and then what you're left with is the plastic former which is inside, and that's quite common. So it's dead easy to sort of to fix that issue. So I just clean up the metal part of the knob, make sure everything is good, and then I just use an epoxy resin then, quick dry, something like arrow dye, just to mix up a little bit, smear it on, which is the same as what they've probably used before, and then I can then just put the knob on and then just slide the metal part of the knob over, and then literally within a couple of minutes you're in the position then where, you know, it's locked into place, it's all glued back and everything is good. But that's what I'm showing here in the video, just, you know, where that knob has sort of come away. And then really the final part of this, after you've done the reassemble, is to actually do, of course, a functional test. Now, when you power up the amplifier, you should hear probably about 4 to 5 seconds the speaker protection relay click over. Most importantly, the fuse should not blow. And what I'll do is I will always power it up via the dim bulb tester initially. And if the dim bulb was glowing brightly, then I know I have a further issue, but the dim bulb will save the amplifier if there's an underlying issue and any components that I've put in there. Here it did not, but remember that dim bulb will do some level of current limiting. So what I do is I leave the amplifier running probably for about 20 minutes, and that's with no speakers connected or no input signal. And then what I do is I do the initial, is that they have these dual emitter resistors that I'm pointing to, and the solder leads protrude up to the top and then out of the resistors. So when you connect your multimeter, you just connect it across the component leads, but you don't have to go underneath the resistors. So it's very easy just to clip them onto the top. And then what I'm doing here is I just set the volume control to minimum and you balance the center point, and then I just make the adjustment then by the respective trimmers as indicated here, to adjust that millivoltage signal to 14 millivolts. Now when I adjust it on the dim bulb tester, I set it lower. I'll set it normally to about 8 millivolts and then just wait for everything then to stabilize through. What I would also say as well is if those adjustment trimmers or presets are dirty, just spray them with De-Oxit with the amplifier powered off, and then just rotate them backwards and forwards a few times and just return them roughly to the original position, and then you can then power the amplifier back up and you should get a very, very smooth action. Now once it's cleared on the initial assessment or initial alignment then on the dim bulb, I'll transfer it then over onto full power, and you'll see that it will increase maybe by a couple of millivolts. And again, I just wait for stabilization, and then I will then adjust that to factory level, which is 14 millivolts. When this amplifier was being adjusted, because we had the failure on the right channel, of course I didn't know what that was previously, but the left channel was high. It was about 18, nearly 20 millivolts when it was stabilizing. And again, that's not uncommon. Remember that there's been an aging process over the many years, and components start to drift out of tolerance, and you would need to do that readjustment. And then once that is done, I can then do a full operational check. So I'm checking, of course, for any DC offset measured at the rear terminals, and it was very, very low, probably less than 2 to 3 millivolts. And then I can then, of course, do a full load test as well by connecting speakers and then verifying, you know, that everything was operational then. And then once that was all done, final thing, as with all these amplifiers, it has a two-stage clean. So there's like a plastic clean, which is used to remove any residual grease, and then a final clean then, which really brings the amplifier, you know, up to sort of not quite looking as good as new, but I would say not very far off then. And it's always a pleasure. I do like working on these Marantz amplifiers. You know, they do produce a really excellent sound quality, and at the same time, because I've worked on them, you know, for many years, it's a nice routine. It's like a nice process that you can follow step by step, and in most cases you will get to the point where the amplifier, you know, is producing an excellent quality of sound, and the customer, of course, you know, they have this, you know, like us all, right? You have a connection maybe to a piece of equipment, you know, which you've had for many years, and I find that with a lot of the owners of the different amplifier brands, you know, they don't want to replace it with a modern amp. They want to see if it can be restored, it can be returned back. Once it is, you know, this kind of work that you're seeing here, and I'm giving you insight into, if you do all of this work, then definitely, you know, the amplifier will provide really trouble-free service, you know, for many years. And then finally, just to close out, and I thought I'd sort of drop this sort of photograph in. What I'm showing are the very large power supply smoothing capacitors, and these are the Elner ones. And although this amplifier, you know, is many years old, when those are tested on the ESR meter, yeah, still really good within specification, and very low equivalent series resistance, or ESR. So yeah, just as a bonus there. So really that sort of brings us to the end of this repair tutorial. So I really appreciate you stopping by, and again, I think the questions really that I get in connection with these tutorials, and the connection with many, you know, new subscribers, as well as people who've been subscribing for many years, you know, for me it's always a pleasure, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And if you've got any feedback, or you need anything, you know, with regard to future content, by all means, you know, just give me a shout. And you can always email, as I say, audio amplifier servicing at aol.com if you need any support or any feedback or anything like that. All right, so once again, thanks very much. Until the next time, cheers, bye bye.